for joining us, Albert. It's really a privilege to have you with us here in this our little neck of the YouTube world.
Well, I might return that. Thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be with you too.
Like me and Steve, we're quite simple, really, and our view is you've got the mind of a planet.
I was reading through your email, Albert, and I'm going,
yeah.
Okay, let me make sure. Wait a minute, time out. Do I understand a quarter of this?
I'm sorry about that, Steve. That's one of my faults. No.
After I read it 4 times, I finally got it. It's okay. Now I know what he's talking about. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Maybe there's a discussion point here.
Yeah, but I think, Steve, a good place to start because a lot of people in our circle may not actually know Albert's background, so it would probably be good to have a bit of that to give really the context of where you're coming from, Albert.
Yeah, very briefly, I've been in product configurator design and implementation most of my professional life. I joined SAP in 1992, and we were basically working on first the predecessor of the LOVC, this OS2-based configurator, but very quickly we were working on the LOVC, and my main contribution, I think, is in the area of the constraints, which I brought with me from a previous academic research project, the ideas at least. Although another credit is that we actually implemented in ABAP, which at the time was thought impossible. Everybody was talking about Lisp and Prolog. And actually, SAP had implemented its own Prolog for that purpose, and I'm a little bit sorry that went away, I think with I forget which release they dropped it, but that would have actually helped customers in implementing their own functionality quite a lot because it's, I think, more accessible than ABAP. But I think that was my main credit in this context, the constraints. And after I retired from SAP, I guess all 3 of us are semi-retired, with Steve being the most retired, and Steve being Phil being the least retired. I had struck on this idea of compressing variant tables, which I thought SAP would follow up on because it was an obvious thing. But at that point, they were in maintenance mode and didn't. So I decided if I didn't want to let this idea die, I would focus on this topic. And it's turned out to be surprisingly interesting. So we've stuck with it.
And to our viewers out there, just do a Google search on Dr. Albert Haag professional papers. You'll be amazed at what you find. And when you read them, you'll be even more amazed. Albert, again, thank you for joining us. We're very privileged to have you. I'd really like to pursue this topic of the compression that you do.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to pursue that is because when I first got into the whole database world in the early 90s, you couldn't do wide tables. You literally couldn't do them. You had to do what were known as normalized tables. Yes. Users hated them. Yeah. I loved them because they worked really well. I understood primary and foreign keys and all that stuff, but the users hated them. So I'd always be extracting all these normalized tables and putting them into this big spreadsheet and giving it to the user, and then they'd maintain it, and I'd take it back and I'd split it into normalized tables again. With your solution, as I understand it, you can go as wide as you want and as deep as you want. Is that true?
In theory, yes. We have this example I could show you of this academic model of the Renault Megane, which they published for academic research. And I think it has 3.6 trillion variants. And yes, you can put those in one table. This, however, is because there are regularities to the product. So if you, let's say, completely randomly generate 3.6 trillion rows, there's no way you can compress that. And I think that's the other point, that if your tables don't compress, you're doing something wrong, maybe with the complexity of your product.
Yeah, I suppose that was one of the thoughts I had was, is there a best practice for your variant table designs? And what you're saying, in some ways, if you can't compress it, there's something.
I think it's actually a more objective measure of product complexity. Just if you can enumerate your variants to see how they compress. But the other problem is, what is the correct width of a variant table? I think it's an interesting topic because there's more to it than just I could do wide tables. In some companies, I guess there's a responsibility for certain areas, and you want, let's say, those characteristics which you own to be together, but you don't care about the rest. And there might be various ways one could discuss what is the correct width of tables.
A great example of that, Albert, is, and Phil, I'll dig out the link for you. You gave a presentation back in Marco, and I don't remember, 2007, 2008, something like that, that talked about, I think it was 5 different various levels of configuration and the depths of complexity in each one. And when you look at, okay, how are each of those supported via variant tables? Because they all could be. Not all of those levels need all of those characteristics.
No.
So it's a great combination of, do I need to be this wide, or where do I draw that line, right? And how do you decide that?
Yeah, actually, the vision is to provide tools which would allow the modeler the choice. The wide tables come about if you have your normalized tables and you join them all into one table. That's your wide table. And your secondary keys and primary keys and all that basically define how this should happen. But it is actually unclear to me, and maybe you can say something to this, Steve, that if you do have this huge set of small tables, it's not that easy to get an overview of what the actual view of the variants in total. In other words, the configurator can help you show things, but if you wanted to query, is a certain variant legal or not, or what are the set of legal variants that match certain where clause in your SQL statement, I think that's not that easy to do, is it?
No, you're right, Albert. It becomes harder the wider you go. And again, this is from a fan of normalized tables. The smaller your table, the easier it is to target that one specific SQL statement. But I would say that we had some, in the company I work for, we had some fairly successful Z tables that were 50 maybe characteristics wide, and we're accessing those with variant functions, but we were able to determine which variants were legal for a set of circumstances fairly quickly and fairly easily. But I think if you get over that, especially if you're just trying to use normal AVC logic or something like that, or LOVC logic, it's going to be really hard.
I think generally what we need here is more customer feedback on how this actually works, but the possibility of doing that is there. And if you have a wide table and don't like it, you could always get the smaller tables from it, I would say, fairly in a fairly straightforward way.
So that's what you said at the beginning, Steve, isn't it? You have a wide table view, but it's that wide table view is made up of all the normalized tables. So it's almost the best of both worlds.
And from just a pure reporting standpoint, you can do that in, what do they call it nowadays, CDS views? But reporting is not the end all, and it's not the most important part of the model. So if we play this scenario out, maybe, I don't know how many years, right? I gave a presentation a few years ago talking about generative design and AI and the actual role of the modeler in the future. And in my opinion, the modeler today is it's a stopgap, because nobody wants to make these various pieces of software talk together, right? So PLM won't talk to SAP, it won't talk to PIM, won't talk to name your software. They don't want to talk to each other. So the modeler steps in. Sooner or later, that's going to go away. Now, how do you get those variant tables that actually start out in a piece of design software, right? How do you get them to move through the process and get into the configurator? It comes back to your point of transparency and movability.
That's my hope, that tables are universally understood, and if the content has no reason to change, then it should be movable.
And that's the sad part, because when I was involved in PLM implementations, I'd look at their CAD models, and it's just a series of tables in the background with switches that check things on and off, which is just a value, yes or no. Hello, I could move that into SAP pretty easily. Oh, no, this software doesn't allow you to do that with that software. Really?
You go through Excel or a database. I think most people go through Excel.
We had some really good op-oppers and some people that would, how should I say it? We had hackers. They'd hack into the PLM system, they'd suck it all out, and they'd dump it into SAP. But to your point, I think most people use Excel or Access or something like that.
The good news, which I wasn't aware of when I started this, is that this intermediate compressed format, which SAP knows, what we call C tuples, but there's a function in SAP called untagged tables. There's no function tag tables. I don't know if it has a real name. It's the multi-values in a cell. That this format is actually, it's not understood by relational databases, but it is understood by most serious configurators I've been able to canvas. If you move to another vendor, normally you'd expect even the compressed form to be readily understood. or if they might say they don't, but they actually do.
That's going to be an interesting challenge, I think, for customers, because for a long time, you could build an untagged table or a C-tuple table in LOVC, right? And then you try to download it into the IPC, and it would strip all that out and just normalize everything.
Sorry.
I don't know what it does today, but I do know that they support it in the knowledge-based download now.
Yes, I can say that what they understood in the normalization was just they multiplied out the C-tuples, which is not your normalization. And this only works if they didn't hit the magic number of 99, of exceeding the 99,999 rows, which, by the way, is still there for this. The other, you can do the compressed rows, but it's still 99,000 max. The news is that we had first pointed out to the importance of this, or the potential of this C-tuple format in, I think, 2016. And I think the AVC moved rather quickly, and the IPC, whatever it's called now, the VCP, CPS, yes.
Yeah, I can't remember. Too many acronyms.
It followed suit recently, and the SSC followed suit also. So the only SAP configurator which might not be doing this is CPQ. I tried to talk to them in Dubrovnik, and they didn't give a clear answer.
That's
so SAP
interesting.
does support this.
Yeah, it's interesting because we started the AVC work group in 2016, and it was pretty much because I think you presented in spring.
Yeah.
And then we had our meeting in early summer. I think it was in June. And somebody in that meeting, it wasn't me, but somebody brought it up and said, we really need to have this in the AVC. And, I can't remember which product manager it was. Might have been Mike. He jumped all over it. It's, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to do that. So thank you again, Albert, for bringing that forward.
I mentioned this in my mail. I think is uncharacteristically quick response from SAP. Yeah.
Well, it was a big win for them because many customers in that first AVC work group meeting were going, we do this every day.
Yeah.
Why don't you support it throughout the whole process? You support it in ECC, but you don't support it anywhere else. And that I think in your presentation was the kicker to that. It started it all off, and then SAP finally said, oh, crap, we have people that want this. Maybe we should do something.
So thank you for the support. I didn't realize it was that strong, but I think maybe more credit goes to your influence than to me.
No, wasn't me that did it, because I didn't even see your presentation that year, Albert. Somebody else did.
Right.
At any rate, so you were talking about, in your email, you're talking about what is the best approach. How do we move forward in that conversation?
On the one hand, I guess both you have had a lot of experience, and Phil still is meeting with customers as we learn. The question is whether you actually have a view of this from practical experience.
From my perspective, and I don't know that my perspective is even valid anymore, to be honest with you. Much of it depends on the model, but I would say you have to look at the entire value stream, starting with, we can't go back to design because there's too many. Yeah. When I say design, I'm talking about pre-engineering, right? So they're using things like SketchUp and so forth and so on. I don't want to go down that road. But once you get into a CAD system or a PLM system, then you can start looking at it and say, okay, what does it look like throughout the entire value stream, from CAD through ERP, through CPQ, through any third-party visual configurators, all the way down through your supply chain. And for each product, it's going to be slightly different. But I think, again, the best practice is move away from normalized tables and move to compressed C-tuple tables. That would be if I had that when I was working, I would have been ecstatic.
Which brings up the other thing is that I think we are ready to evaluate. We have some ideas. These C-tuples require different support for modelers. You don't see much if you look at a table of C-tuples. At least sometimes you don't, and often you don't. And so I think one of the things we showed in Montreal is that we can present this to the user as if it were a sorted, uncompressed table that looks just like a normal database table, even though it's represented differently in the background. And I think the next question will be how to support editing, adding, let's say, blocks of combinations at one time rather than doing the individual rows. And Also, negation is fairly easy if people wanted to. And as a queer side effect, we can, if you have a set of tables that form a constraint net or are supposed to be in a constraint net, it's fairly easy to simulate the constraints directly in the modeling tool without needing to call the configurator. So there's a few benefits that need experimentation.
So Phil, what's your experience been?
Yeah, I suppose just with my background of trying to train in a good practice, best practice way, but through our training courses and things like that, I think what I tend to find in business is you get different levels of experience with the VC modelers. Like you will get some very technical people, you'll get some business people who inherit becoming a modeler, that sort of thing. I suppose if I'm picking up from Albert correctly, I like the idea that it's working towards people not necessarily having to think about the technicalities as much. If we've got a good practice approach with, say, the variant table design, tools like Albert's take care of the whole technicalities in the back end, if you like, where people don't have to worry about that so much. So you don't necessarily need that discussion about, oh, should I have wide tables or narrow tables? We just want these tables and not need to worry about performance impacts perhaps we had to in the past. So I suppose what I'm saying is if the modeler can have a low friction approach to things where they can just concentrate on the modeling and not worry so much about some of the technicalities and just do what they need to do. That's probably my view on it. Like just from a modeler's point of view, can my job be made a lot simpler?
Phil, if I can ask you a question real quick.
Yeah.
With all the various companies that you've worked with, how did the VC modeler know what changes need to be made to the tables? But who tells them what updates need to be made to the tables? The people might not know what specific tables in the system need to be updated, but who's saying change the model in this way?
That's all, that myriad of stakeholders from marketing to production to design.
So Albert, there's your target audience for your tool. Don't target the modeler, target those business users that are deciding this is what needs to change. And I almost hate to say this, but take the modeler out of the equation.
Yes, I think one of the things we already tried when I was at SAP with some internal projects was to create a static knowledge base, which would not change a lot, but to have all of the content that changes in tabular form in variant tables, so that the product responsibles were able to manage that content without having to worry about writing constraints or any of that.
Yeah, because Steve is like, it's really the opposite at the moment, isn't it? Like I find often the VC team become the integrator.
They are.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't have to be. It's funny, right when I was leaving my company, they were looking at PIM software, so product information management softwares. And SAP had bought Calidus 2-3 years before. Calidus had the #1 PIM in the world, and SAP didn't know what to do with it. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what a missed opportunity, guys. And it's still a missed opportunity. So this is where I see, Albert, either with your third-party company now or your influence that you still have with SAP, is to drive some change forward from that aspect. And let's face it, the modeling job that Phil, you and I did for 20 plus years, I always used to joke with my management, my job shouldn't exist. The only reason my job exists is because the software's disconnected.
I think it's configuration has been a learning process, and the idea is that you do have to try to get more and more simple over time. One of the other things I mentioned in my mail is that I'm still not sure what the status is with concerning queries to configurable products outside of the sales configuration process. I remember when I ordered my SAP company car with tinted windows, there was on the invoice, you have feature XYZ1239. And the sales guy said, that's your tinted windows. So I guess I'm thinking there must be some value in making it more transparent to access what you're actually selling for other processes as well. But again, Steve, or Phil, I would value whether this is actually a problem or it's been solved. I don't know.
It hadn't been solved when I left, Albert, in 2019, because a large part of my function when I left was taking queries from the business. They would say, how much of this particular type of feature is used on these products and what part numbers does it drive? And to find that information out in SAP is not actually easy. I made a lot of money doing that, to be honest. Transparency, to your point, is a big issue, and it's still not. I don't think HANA and the AVC have solved that.
And I remember it's not completely the same, but related that there was another company producing complex products, which from the sales handling consisted of many parts. It was like an advanced mode product. But then I got a call from their back-end team asking whether it would be okay to have 2,000 characteristics in a class, because they want to treat it as one object with 2,000 characteristics rather than having this nice structured view of the product. And I think that's probably because of integration, because it's just easier to deal with a flat list of features than with a complex structure at the high level, at the sales level.
I think even at the sales level, Albert, I did a presentation of different class structures that you could use, right? And I was shocked. I was literally shocked when I gave that presentation, because I'm a huge fan of hierarchies. I think they're simple. I think they're elegant. I think they make your life easy. I was about the only one in the room that thought that. And everybody's going, no, you should have one class per product. What? And yeah, they wanted all these characteristics in them. I'm like, that makes no sense to me.
I'm on your side with the hierarchies, actually. The class hierarchies, I'm also a fan of those, but I was just wondering whether from the technical handling point of view, if you are like doing an invoice and you're selling a car which has, I don't know, 99 characteristics or something, it wouldn't be easier just to be able to query the car for these 99 characteristics than to start the configurator and figure out what it might be telling you.
And to be honest, Albert, you can actually do that today in the C-base. You have to write the query. You have to know how to write the query into the C-base to get that, but you can get it. And the issue that I actually find when I was working is that the marketing people called, let's say they called the tinted windows, right?
Yeah.
They didn't call it tinted windows. They called it window dressing or something, right? And engineering called it's a window.
Yeah.
And you get into the ERP system and it's like window tinting. And then you get down into the supply chain and this is the final. How do you know what to query? It all depends on which person you're talking to.
Yeah. Again, I'm happy that there are people like you thinking about this, or had been thinking about this. I know you're retired. But I think that having the ability at least to put this all in tables and also to do the consistency checking between two tables. So one of our demos is the T-shirt, and we have a sales view and a manufacturing view of it, and they agree on some core characteristics. And so if you query the model on one of them, it will automatically restrict the other, and based on that set of common characteristics with a constraint would. And again, I'm thinking that's going to be helpful, but if people don't know about it and don't use it, then it's just a guess.
So my experience, Albert, is the younger the person, the more success you will have with that approach. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because before I left, we hired a very young engineer, and this gentleman was maybe 2 years out of university, and he wanted to understand a little bit about SAP and the whole process. So I started explaining it to him and the disconnects about how things were named, and he said, what do you want me to call it? I'll call it anything you want in the CAD system. I don't care. And of course, as soon as he did that, he got jumped on by all of the senior people because he's violating the engineering standards.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
He didn't care. And what we found is that the entire business worked so much smoother with just that one simple change. It's the younger people that are willing to do that. It's not the old farts like us.
Unfortunately, I need to be in the latter category, but I try to be in the former category.
I think all of us do, but I'm lumping us into a generational thing, right?
Yeah, no, it is true. I think I found that in a couple of companies, you get the older people like us and a few young guys coming through, and their mindset is completely different. They'll go, yeah, but they just don't have that, call it, constraint of thought that sometimes we have, and they're a bit more freeform in their thinking and, oh, how do I solve this problem? I think it's very true. We've got to encourage that sort of thought. This is probably somewhere along here we come up with some way to close the meeting, don't we, Steve?
Yeah, usually that's like, we'll talk about something else next time. And Albert, if you're willing, I think we would love to have you back to continue this conversation.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely willing. I'm hoping that I can contribute something useful.
Oh, you do. Every time you open your mouth, you contribute something useful, Albert. Albert, thank you so much for joining us. It's always good to see you. I hope to see you in New Orleans.
We'll be there. Okay.
I might be there, but I won't be at the conference. I'll be there to keep Phil off the streets.
Okay. We'll work on it.
Don't worry.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Okay.
Bye-bye.